And now begins my final video on the practitioners of the system. If you haven't checked out my first two videos on Khabib and the Nurmagomedov system, I highly recommend you do. It is essential to understanding my analysis here. But let's get into it. I have broken down Islam's career into 3 case studies. Once we get through those, I will discuss what we learned, compare him to Khabib, and analyze his current legacy.
As a quick refresher, remember that the system is completely predicated on strategic cardio attrition through use of 3 main tactics: guillotine traps, leverage, and limb lockdown/grip attacks. One more bit of context. The reason I did Khabib first was to use this video as a way of contrasting Islam from him. All of these case studies will serve to highlight major differences between the two, so they will feel a lot more negative in this video than my Khabib video. In essence, if I haven't critiqued Islam's lack of something that I praised in Khabib's video, then I am tacitly praising it here as well. Anything Islam is better at than Khabib, I will say. Anything he is worse at, I will critique. But keep that in mind so I don't get yelled at in the comments for being too harsh. In this case study, we will look at Chris Wade's overall fight with Islam in detail. I believe Wade is important for a multitude of reasons that we will come to see. Wade shows really strong scrambling skills, which is always a problem for control-focused grapplers like the system creates, Islam included. The first sequence to highlight comes in the first minute of the opening round. Islam shoots a takedown, but his knee gets caught a bit on the cage floor, leading to a momentum drop that precludes him from finishing the takedown. Islam powers through and is able to use the lessons from Khabib by turning it into a throwaway takedown, purely used to press Wade to the cage. Islam immediately goes to work pulling Wade's leg out from under him and locks down Wade's left leg while fighting to remove the other. Eventually he succeeds, and Wade attempts the guillotine that we have previously covered. To reiterate one last time, the guillotine is a red herring used to break down opponent's posture, since Islam's control of Wade's legs keeps him from being able to finish the choke. Islam uses the focus that Wade is diverting to the guillotine to snap up his legs and lock in the Dagestani leg iron. Islam uses the opportunity to rotate Wade away from the fence and enters his half guard. Once again, the guillotine worked just as planned for Islam. Islam controls for a bit before using his right arm to lock down Wade's leg and pass into mount. We need to pause here to discuss our first comparison to Khabib. Everything we have seen so far could be replaced with any Khabib sequence, and there would be no visual difference. This is where the first difference comes into play. Islam works his mount higher, while Wade wall walks into a reversal attempt that succeeds. Islam advanced a bit too high and a bit too fast, and didn't have enough control to maintain his mount, nor dissuade the wall walk attempt. Keep this in mind for later, it's very important for a full discussion section. Wade finishes the reverse, and Islam is now controlled. Islam works to set up a triangle from bottom that he is unable to finish, but controls Wade for most of the round from this position. Wade eventually breaks out, and we later see Islam use butterfly hooks to elevate Wade for either a reverse or get-up attempt that Wade is able to stifle. Islam is unable to mount much of a defense for the remainder of the round and ends it in bottom. Moving on to the second, Islam catches an inside leg kick for a takedown attempt. Wade has now, on both takedowns, been able to successfully hide his rear leg from Islam's hungry grasp. A moral victory, if nothing else. Once again, unfortunately, Wade goes for the guillotine, which loses him all that positive benefit I just gave him. Islam used that limb lockdown he initiated in the takedown to smother the attempt before it even started. Wade needs that left leg free and in a fully locked in full guard to truly lock in this choke. But something of importance happens. This guillotine may be deeper than I gave it credit for. Islam seems to panic and aggressively attacks the closed half guard that Wade has in an attempt to mount him and relieve the pressure. Wade uses Islam's incredibly off-balance posture to reverse him. Just like the last reversal, keep this one in your head for later. We have now seen Islam twice overcommit to an action only to be reversed by Wade. Wade maintains that guillotine grip, which looks tight, but Islam lets us know he is okay. Wade never releases that guillotine grip, and Islam is able to steadily position himself to easily reverse back into a north-south position. Islam re-enters half and finishes the defense of the choke, which Wade releases. We are back to square one of the system now. Wade tries to attack Islam's half guard by freeing his leg, while purposely giving his back to fight Islam's grip. Not a great choice, all things considered. Islam uses the opportunity to try and lock in his leg hooks, but gets too off-balanced, requiring a posting left arm, with his free arm holding Wade's chest. Wade sees that posting arm and attacks it to try and reverse Islam again. Islam reacts before Wade can pull it out and grabs onto Wade with it, but is off balance. Wade again reverses an imbalanced Islam. Unfortunately, he goes for a guillotine again. and again he gets reversed by it. Let's pause and talk again. Islam has now been reversed thrice from imbalanced advancements. Wade has now 3 times had his guillotine stuffed, forcing him into ever worse positions. Wade needs to stop with the guillotines and focus on technical control. Fortunately for Wade, his issues in this fight were much easier to fix. Unfortunately for Wade, he doesn't adapt and loses to Islam by unanimous decision. I want to highlight a few sequences in the 3rd round before I move on to his fight with Tsarukyan. A bit over a minute into the final round, Wade uses a Kimura trap to reverse an imbalanced Islam. Can you guess what happens next? Wade uses a guillotine and gets reversed. With about 3 minutes left in the 3rd, Islam advances into mount, advances it further up Wade, who uses a wall walk to again elevate and nearly reverses Islam again. Islam was saved by a pinky in the cage. But hey, Wade used a big toe to elevate him, so I say it's a push. Okay, so that's the end of our analysis of this fight. What have we learned? Quickly, remember that this was Islam's 3rd UFC fight, and at the time of this recording, it was over 6 years ago. What my eyes tell me is that whereas Khabib uses the system as a means of accentuating his skill set, at this point in his career, Islam used it to bail out his technical mistakes in leverage and control. Honestly, without those guillotines, we might have seen Wade win this fight 30-27 unanimously after controlling Islam for all 3 rounds. I skipped most of the first to save time in this case study, but if you want to know what Islam looked like in bottom guard of Wade, watch that round in full. It honestly wasn't very promising. As such, Islam needs to be more conservative in his advances, and he needs to develop the leverage aspect of his control to better use the system as a whole. I was going to save this remark for later, but I feel as though I am coming off too negative about Islam in comparison to Khabib. I will say that I am very confident in my opinion that at this point in his career, Islam's takedown offense was better than at any point in Khabib's career from a purely technical perspective. Islam's arsenal of trips is noticeably larger and more diverse than Khabib's. Whereas Khabib largely shot single and double legs to the fence, advancing to the body lock, then used trips to off balance and throw opponents like the examples versus Trujillo on screen, Islam displays more trips from various positions that are the primary means of grounding his opponent rather than purely to off balance into a throw. This is not a knock on Khabib, but one of the biggest visual differentiators in their strategic and tactical attacks for opponents. So there, not negative on Islam, just critiquing. Now we move to one of my all-time favorite fights, with the fighter I still maintain is the #1 prospect on the UFC men's roster, Tsarukyan. Check out my video on him to hear why. Tsarukyan is making his UFC debut here as a pretty strong underdog to Islam. Little does Islam know how much of a live dog Arman truly is. To begin, Arman slips on a spinning attack, leading to some clinch fighting. They battle back and forth for a minute or so until Islam hits a gorgeous trip takedown. He lands right into mount with Arman's right arm trapped under Islam's left leg. This is a terrible position for Arman. Arman is also trapped in a Dagestani leg iron, so basically everything is going wrong for him here. Arman manages to free his arm, then he breaks out of the Dagestani leg iron. Arman uses butterfly hooks to elevate and reorient Islam into a much more advantageous position for Tsarukyan. Arman uses those hooks further to initiate a get-up and returns to his feet. Arman went from having 3 of his 4 limbs locked into that Dagestani leg iron to back on his feet in a headlock in under 30 seconds. There's absolutely something different about this kid, and we will all see how that develops. But back to Islam. My analysis pushes me towards the conclusion that this was more Arman's initiative than Islam's making specific mistakes, so I won't decrement him for this. They battle in the clinch for another 2 minutes or so before Arman lands the first takedown on Islam in his UFC career to much fanfare. They continue to battle in grounded, semi-grounded, and clinch positions until ending the round striking at distance. The first round feels like an entire fight in and of itself. I don't want to go too deep on unimportant sequences, but absolutely watch or rewatch this fight if you haven't seen it recently. So moving on to the second round. Arman is down 10-9 and needs to take this round to even the scorecards. The two battle at distance for a bit before Arman initiates a takedown and gets defended perfectly by Islam. They clinch up for a bit before Islam lands another gorgeous trip takedown. Arman scrambles back up quickly, but used a ton of energy in the process. That first round was highly energy intensive for both fighters, so neither can afford to expend any more energy than they have to. Thankfully for Islam, the system is built for this very thing. After Arman gets pushed down to the fence in a clinch position, grabs onto a Kimura before Islam takes him down. Arman uses the position to try and initiate a Kimura trap get-up or reversal, but Arman's right leg is stuck, precluding him from finishing that position. I went into deeper detail on this technique in his video, so check that out. Arman is however able to re-establish his half guard, which Islam uses to initiate leverage situations that are a key tenet of the system. Let's pause on this position and ask yourself how Arman can get up from here at 116, or later here at 113. Islam is using the passive weight of his mass, coupled with gravity, to just weigh on Arman like a lead blanket. Any get-up by Arman will be incredibly energy intensive at the cost of little on Islam's part. The perfect trade-off after that costly energy first. As if on cue, Arman explodes up after fishing his hand between Islam's legs for a single leg get-up. The technique here is not only gorgeous, but astoundingly effective against a control wizard like Islam, but it costs tons of energy for Arman. I'm highlighting how amazing it is, but in the end, Abdulmanap would be proud because Islam is tremendously tipping the attritional warfare meter in his favor. Arman retains the single leg and pushes Islam to the fence. Tsarukyan tries another high-energy expenditure takedown attempt that Islam balances his way out of. Visually, this second round was a masterclass in scrambling by Arman, but it doesn't win him a round on the scorecard. It really only matters to analysts like us because it displays his incredible potential for the future. Arman is now down 2 rounds heading into the third at a clear energy disadvantage to Islam. Arman is clearly slower on the feet due to how gassed he likely is. Islam seems to recognize this and is more content to ride out Arman's attacks, sticking to the key tenet of the system, energy attritional warfare. Arman is able to mount some offense in the third, but it wasn't enough to finish Islam. Islam wins 30-27 on my scorecard, handing Arman a loss in his UFC debut. I focused mainly on what Arman was doing rather than Islam, because in my opinion this fight was Islam learning to stick to the system's guidelines more tightly, rather than trying to style on an incredibly game Tsarukyan. Once again, someone could listen to this and think I am being too critical of Islam. I actually think this is probably his best professional fight. Arman was pedal to the metal the entire fight, pushing Islam in every facet of grappling. Islam honestly didn't make any major mistakes though, and like a big brother putting his hand on the younger brother's forehead while they swung punches at Heir, Islam was able to control the entire tempo of the fight from open to close. Finishing your opponents is not the only way to dominate them. Eating every offensive maneuver while calmly dismantling them piece by piece is to me a greater show of dominance. This is Islam as a world beater, albeit boring. I have quotes in my script, so don't yell at me. I got heat for saying Israel was boring, but I am mainly quoting consensus. I personally love this fight. Next up is a dual case study of strong importance for Islam's upcoming fight with Oliveira, but also for my main question about the system. How does leverage implementation change when faced with true jiu-jitsu talents like RDA vs Khabib and now Islam vs Thiago Moises and Davi Ramos? Since there are nearly 7 rounds of action for me to analyze in 5-ish minutes of video time, I'm going to choose 3 key sequences. 1 from Ramos, 2 from Moises. I choose 2 from Moises because it is more recent, but let's start with Ramos. He fought Ramos directly after Tsarukyan. The thing about this fight is that it was almost entirely fought on the feet at distance. Striker versus striker. This is a grappling analysis, but if you're looking to analyze Islam's striking, this is a great starting point. We're going to jump right to round 3 to start this case study. Ramos and Islam have spent the preceding 2 rounds battling on the feet, and now grappling comes into place. Ramos comes in aggressively, and Islam grabs a plumb clinch to attack his posture. Islam throws a gorgeous knee to the head that lands flush and clearly stuns Ramos and grounds him. Islam chases the finish, but Ramos intelligently defends enough to stay afloat. Islam slows down, and they settle into fighting each other out of open full guard. Ramos continually hunts for the lockdown you see on screen with his right leg and arm. He is trying to lock down Islam's left arm to give him leverage to reposition and attack an armbar or triangle. Islam is able to fight it off, but Ramos reattempts it a couple times more. They battle a bit more, and Ramos finally has the space to really attack the right arm with that same lockdown technique. This time, he sets it up a bit better by wrist locking Islam's left arm down and away so that Ramos can rapidly extend his right leg upwards to lock in the submission. Islam also fights this one off by freeing the left arm. As time passes, it becomes clear to me that Islam is a bit lost. He seems stuck in a neutral gear, maintaining control and fighting off the submission attempts Ramos sends his way. Islam looks like Khabib pre-RDA fight right now. They both had this sort of stuck in neutral gear style that comes up when facing opponents with strong bottom skills. A bit later, Ramos again attempts the same lockdown to rotation attack for an armbar or triangle choke, but here we see Islam improve a ton on one of my earlier complaints. Islam had a bad tendency to get off balance when opponents made rapid attacks like Ramos is now. Islam plays this one perfectly in my eyes. Islam uses that passive leverage that's so key to the system in order to deny the escape, reversal, or sub that Ramos could pair with this attack. Ramos tries to escape out the back, and Islam resets position to further leverage his weight to deny the escape again. Ramos spends the remainder of the third locking in the arm, rotating, and attacking the armbar or triangle choke, but Islam stops it dead on arrival every single time. Islam is still fighting out of neutral, but his technical defense is too impenetrable, and Ramos falls by decision. Islam is showing a marked improvement from our Wade case study, but he still hasn't hit the level Khabib showed in his fights with RDA and Iaquinta yet. So let's transition to Thiago Moises, another talented jiu-jitsu practitioner, in our final case study of this video. Islam spends most of the first round battling for position against the fence with Thiago or trading blows on the feet, steadily wearing on Thiago's energy. At 109, we see Islam land a very Khabib-esque takedown using a body lock to lift and ground Thiago into open half. Like RDA did versus Khabib, Thiago is able to regain his full guard, and Islam returns to that neutral gear he has been caught in so often. The second begins, and Thiago is continuously making the mistake of taking backward steps toward the cage rather than rounding off his exits to clear space. Islam punishes this at 352 by initiating a grappling exchange and again attempting a body lock strength takedown. Islam didn't have the right leverage nor the inherent strength advantage to finish that one off. A minute or so later, Islam has been reversed in the clinch, and Moises has locked in a sub-glute body lock that he uses to slam Islam for a takedown. Islam surprisingly attacks a guillotine, which I initially thought was a mistake, until Islam used 2 butterfly hooks on Thiago's waist to elevate and reorient him. Islam takes the opportunity to willingly give his back on the getup to try and maneuver to the fence. Before he can get there, Thiago aggressively jumps his back, but he ends up too high and gets reversed by Islam. Islam wastes no time and presses Moises to the cage with his back taken. I want to pause here to highlight a key difference between Khabib and Islam in this same position. Khabib prefers to be higher on his opponent, whereas Islam occupies this position we see now. Khabib occupies where he does to put extra weight on Moises' lower back through passive weight. Islam, however, prefers to attack with wrist locks in an attempt to flatten Thiago. This isn't a positive or negative, but it is, however, one of the key differentiators between the two. Khabib is much more focused on using leverage to tire opponents before advancing positions. Islam seems to prefer the opposite, advance position and then tire them out from worse and worse spots. The pros to Islam's approach come in the form of faster finishes like we see with Hooker and Bobby Green. The downside comes in the situations I highlighted earlier, where Islam can overcommit and get reversed by an opponent with more energy than Khabib would have allowed them. Simply, Islam can finish less skilled grapplers faster than Khabib could. But Khabib is able to level the playing field with more talented grapplers by tiring them out before giving them any sort of attack opportunity. It's a sort of patience to aggressiveness trade-off that forms the linchpin of their grappling differences in the form of mentality and choices they make. The round ends with Islam maintaining that position for a majority of the remaining time, while attacking wrists to attempt to open a rear naked choke opportunity to finish the fight. Skipping a bit into the third, Islam uses numerous takedown opportunities to tire Moises further, until his third attempt lands him in a decent position. Thiago uses momentum to try and scrape Islam from him while reversing position, but Islam is able to fight it off enough that Moises has to relent. Moises makes a great call by attempting a leg lock into a near 50-50 position. A key point to notice here, Moises trapped Islam's arm on the lockup, so like Islam did to Arman last fight, Moises has an extra limb trapped by this position. Islam doesn't mount much of a defense, as Thiago is now deep enough to seriously threaten a finish, so Islam lands some strikes for the final 45 seconds until the bell rings. This was a great attrition round by Islam. So now we head into the fourth and what will be the final round of this contest. Thiago is wearing the damage and looks to be running low on energy. With what has become the story of this fight happening again, Islam uses pressure footwork to back Thiago closer and closer to the cage. He shoots a takedown and presses Moises to the cage wall. A tired Moises didn't press his legs to the wall fast enough, and now Islam has all the leverage he needs to lift and then slam a helpless Moises. Notice how Islam adjusted his arm placement so that he would fall right into Moises' guard. Later, Moises hooks Islam's left leg to leverage out of the corner that Islam has been stuffing him into. Islam postures up to strike, and Moises pushes him off for a get-up attempt. Islam now has him right where he wants him. A tired Moises can't get up in time, and Islam jumps his back. Just like I highlighted in the second round, Islam is back in that position, albeit with a much more tired Thiago. Islam alternates between striking and attacking the wrists to maneuver an opening for a fight-finishing choke. At 228, it finally appears, and Islam seals the deal for a 4th round finish. Alright, so our case studies are now done. Now to analyze what we have learned.
So now with 7 case studies finished across 10 fights respectively between Khabib and Islam, I think we have a complete understanding of them as individuals and practitioners of the system. As this is a grappling breakdown, I'm only going to spend a very short couple sentences on their striking differences. Then we will talk about their overall similarities and their differences, and then answer a couple key questions. Is Islam Khabib 2.0, or is he better? And project his overall future and development. So first, striking. Islam is clearly a better striker technically, and his striking is a better complement to his grappling compared to Khabib. Islam is a much better pressure footwork striker than Khabib. Khabib mainly relies on aggressive attacks like the power overhand that leveled McGregor, or the flying knees he throws throughout his career to bridge the distance on his opponents. His overall striking defense is lackluster, but rarely got tested, so if he were still fighting, I would say he could be in trouble in the future, but he isn't. Islam, however, is superior in almost every regard. Better footwork, better technical defense, more skills, but one key thing to note, Khabib strikes out of orthodox and Islam out of southpaw. This may seem small, but it alters the way that they have to attack opponents a ton. But now to similarities. Obviously, as they are both practitioners of the system, they are heavily reminiscent of each other visually. Both are attrition grapplers who almost exclusively finish with attrition setup submissions. Islam is more aggressive in his submission attacks than Khabib, which leads to earlier submissions when facing inferior grappling opponents. But it can lead him to problems against above-average scramblers, who can off-balance and reverse Islam with impunity. Both prefer entering half guard to start their attacks, but Islam can get caught in neutral, in half and full guard, because he is yet to have his Ayaquinta fight, where he truly locks in his plan of attack the way Khabib did. As I've already turned his similarities section into a differences section, let's just get into that. The major areas of difference to me are as follows. Unclear plan of attack, which I just discussed, the arsenal of takedown offense, submission skill, intuitive leverage feel, overall athletic ability, and quality of victories. So first up, let's talk takedown arsenal. As I prior stated, Islam has more takedown options than Khabib does in my study of the two of them. Khabib, however, is much more efficient at his couple takedowns. It's like the famous saying, I fear not the man that has practiced 1,000 punches, but the one that practices one punch 1,000 times. Khabib is the latter, Islam the former. Khabib is better at his top takedown options, but Islam is good at many more than Khabib is. I don't want to sound too critical. I actually think Islam is totally fine with this, and I wouldn't recommend changing or anything like that. Next, and the final controllable aspect of Islam's differences comes in his submission skill. Khabib is superior to Islam in his ability to finish submissions. I would say both seem to have the ability to hit all the same chokes, but Khabib is able to finish more than Islam. This is sort of a hard point to make visually, so I will explain. I usually rate fighters' submission skill by their ability to finish submissions from incomplete positions or unorthodox angles. If a submission requires 5 aspects to be in place to finish traditionally, any fighter that can do it in less is a greater than average talent. Think of the guillotine choke. To finish it, you need to lock in the grip on the neck, and then typically you need to grab a closed full guard to have enough leverage to get the tap. Fighters who can finish it out of half guard are thus better overall than average, considering they are missing one major aspect of the traditional setup. Another example is arm triangles. Generally, you need to get into side control on the opposite side of the choke to finish it. Fighters who can finish from mount are superior to average, and a fighter that can do it from half guard is superior than the mount finishers. Comparatively, fighters that have trouble finishing a fully locked-in choke rate negative for me. Islam should have been able to finish this triangle from bottom on Wade, but was unable to. Compare this to Khabib's finish of Gaethje from the same position, or a younger Khabib being unable to finish this one prior to his improvement. Of course, this is not set in stone as I just showed. Islam absolutely can improve, but Khabib against Gaethje showed his submission skills are a level above. But now we have to get into the unfortunate part. Differences that are inalterable in my analysis. Studying Khabib and Islam together and separately as practitioners of the system, I believe that Islam lacks Khabib's next level intuitive understanding of leverage positions. This is an intangible skill that I do not believe he can develop. This is something Khabib was born with or developed over an incredibly long period of time. Islam doesn't demonstrate the sequences of otherworldly recognition of small levers of attack that ratchet up strength differentials small percents that led to Khabib's absolutely incredible peak. If there is anything that sets Khabib apart from literally anyone else, it is this. Islam is very obviously strong, but Khabib is stronger and can leverage that strength exponentially more due to the leverage adjustments only he can make. On that, I believe that Islam is a rung or two lower in overall athletic strength. Khabib seems just a couple levels stronger in takedowns and control that Islam has never been able to reach, and I do not expect him to. Khabib's speed is also a level or two higher than Islam's. This is what ratchets up the potency of Khabib's couple takedowns to levels higher than the gamut of Islam's arsenal. Khabib is just moments quicker and more agile than Islam is. Again, not something you can train for, it's just the genetic lottery. And finally, quality of victories. In my analysis, Khabib's two best victories are over RDA and raging Al Iaquinta. Islam's are against Thiago Moises, a now unranked lightweight, and Arman Tsarukyan, who I see as the best prospect on the UFC men's roster, but is yet to reach his peak. Khabib fought a peaking RDA and smoked him over 3 rounds of grappling dominance. Khabib also fought a peak Al Iaquinta, who never reached the championship caliber, but his skills were a major test for Khabib's. It's arguable that Thiago should be replaced with Chris Wade in my rankings, but he was not re-signed by the UFC after his next fight, which he won. Overall, Khabib is just a couple levels above Islam in peak talent as it currently stands, and in their overall potential as MMA fighters in my analysis. Khabib's athletic and intangible gifts give him a higher potential ceiling as a fighter than Islam can reach. That is by no means a slight. Khabib is one of the greatest fighters in history and easily one of the most dominant at his peak. Islam could absolutely win the lightweight belt and defend it multiple times, but up-and-comers like Damir Ismagulov, Arman Tsarukyan, Mateusz Gamrot with some added weapons, and of course Charles Oliveira, who's not up-and-coming but already here, could leverage athletic decay as Islam ages into humanizing him further and further as a fighter. In the end, I doubt he lives up to the potential that Khabib, Abdulmanap, and others put on him. We should all just love Islam for what he is, not compare him to an unattainable and unrealistically remembered figurehead like Khabib. Islam is one of the best lightweight fighters on planet Earth, and he should be discussed as such, not compared to Khabib, who he likely will never reach. But he is Islam Makhachev, so let's just enjoy that. And my final video dedication. This video is dedicated to the memory of my Aunt Bertha. She unfortunately passed a few weeks ago due to complications stemming from a lifelong battle with diabetes. As the series wraps up, if you enjoyed my work, please consider donating to the American Diabetes Association. I have linked to it in the description below.